Dear students, today we are going to study a new poem, After Blenheim, written by Robert Southey. Let's know about the poem. After Blenheim brings out the horrors of war in a simple but ironic way. The Battle of Blenheim was fought in 1704 in the village between the English and the Austrians on the one side and the French on the other side. The battle resulted in a grand victory of the English under the Duke of Marlborough. In this battle, thousands of men were killed. Women became widows and children became orphans. The battle called war caused much ruin and destruction. The English registered a grand victory over the French. Old Caspar's grandchildren failed to understand how a horrible war can be called a famous victory. The old man has no answer to this question. Let us go to the poem in detail, stanza-wise. It was a summer evening. Old Caspar's work was done, and he, before his cottage door, was sitting in the sun, and by him spotted on the green his little grandchild Wilhelmine. The first stanza begins with a picturesque description of summer evening. The poet introduces the main character of the poem. Old Caspar had just finished his work for the day and was sitting in the sun before his cottage door, watching his granddaughter Wilhelmine play on the field. Second stanza. She saw her brother Peterkin roll something large and round, which he desired that revelled in playing there had found. He came to ask what he had found that was so large and smooth and round. While playing, Wilhelmine saw her brother Peterkin rolling something large, smooth and round, which he had found beside the stream. He was curious to know what that thing was and thus turned to his grandfather for information. Third stanza. Old Caspar took it from the boy who stood expectant by, and then the old man shook his head and, with a natural sigh, "It is some poor fellow's skull," said he, "who fell in the great victory." Old Caspar took the large and smooth and round thing from his grandson's hand and shook his head with a sigh, as he figured that it was some poor fellow's skull who had died in the war. It is ironic that he refers to the Battle of Blenheim as a great victory at the cost of loss of human lives. Fourth stanza. I find them in the garden, for there is any here about, and often when I go to plough, the plowshare turns them out, for many thousand men, said he, were slain in that great victory. Caspar goes on to mention that he had found many such skulls while ploughing the land, as thousands of soldiers were killed in the victorious war. The dead bodies of these soldiers lie in the fields unnoticed. However, Caspar's use of the term great victory expresses his pride at the sacrifice of the soldiers who played a vital role in the war. Fifth stanza. Now let us what 'twas all about. Young Peterkin, he cries, and little Wilhelmine looks up with wonder waiting eyes. Now tell us all about the war and what they fought each other for. The children were excited to know more about the war. They were curious to know about the purpose of the war. They had associated a sense of thrill, adventure, and excitement with the idea of war and sacrifice. Little Wilhelmine looked up to her grandfather in anticipation with wonder waiting eyes. In this stanza, the poet attempts to distinguish the kind of curiosity and enthusiasm associated with a child. Sixth stanza. It was the English, Caspar cried, who put the French to rout, but what they fought each other for, I could not well make out. But everybody said, quoth he, that it was a famous victory. The Battle of Blenheim was one of the major battles of the War of Spanish Succession in which the English successfully defeated the Franco-Bavarian army. Caspar takes pride in the great victory, but he is unable to tell his grandchildren the reason behind the war. He did not even try to find the purpose behind it. He just chose to know what others told him regarding the war, that it was a famous victory. Seventh stanza. My father lived at Blenheim then, yon little stream hard by. They burned his dwelling to the ground, and he was forced to fly. So with his wife and child he fled, nor had he where to rest his head. In this stanza, we observe Caspar recollecting the memories of his past. He tells the children that his father used to live at Blenheim. The French soldiers burned the homes of several innocent people, among which was his father's. This destruction forced the people to leave the village and search for a safer place. Caspar's father thus fled with his wife and young Caspar in search of shelter, but he was unable to find a home because of the dreadful war. This rendered their family homeless. Eighth stanza. With the fire and sword the country round was wasted far and wide, and many a childing mother then and newborn baby died. But things like that must be at every famous victory. Stanza 8 highlights the horrific aspects of war. The symbol of fire and sword embodies the evil spirit of human cruelty and destruction. The image of death of pregnant mothers and newborn babies heightens the idea of the ruination of human beings caused by none other than men themselves. The idea is to express how thousands of innocent lives are taken in due course of futile and meaningless war that is sure to bring only damage and destruction. The irony in the poem is made evident by Caspar as he says that these things were meant to happen at every battle where there is a great victory. Ninth stanza. They say it was a shocking sight after the field was won, for many thousand bodies here lay rotting in the sun. But things like that, must be after a famous victory. The poet, through Caspar, goes on to describe the agony of war. He mentions the shocking sight of the battlefield that was full of dead bodies of the soldiers rotting in the sun. Through this image, the poet attempts to bring into consideration the indignity in the way the soldiers lay. They were reduced to mere status of an inanimate object. There is no dignity, no glory in war, only misery. Even after such a terrifying aspects of the war, Caspar regards it as a famous victory, which emphasizes the ignorance of the old man about the purpose and consequences of war. 10th stanza. Great prize the Duke of Marlborough won, and our good Prince Eugene. Why, it was a very wicked thing, said little Wilhelmine. Nay, nay, my little girl, quoth he, it was a famous victory. Duke of Marlborough was an English general. He was the commander of the British forces in the Battle of Blenheim. Prince Eugene and Duke of Marlborough represented Britain in the battle and defeated the French at Blenheim. Caspar sang praises for the men who brought the famous victory to the nation. But Wilhelmine, confused at the meaningless praises, exclaims that the war was a wicked thing. For the first time in the poem, we see a disapproval of the false glory of war. But shutting the little child, Caspar goes on to repeat the same thing. The war for him is not a wicked thing as long as it is a famous victory. 11th and the last stanza. and everybody praised the Duke who this great fight did win. But what good came of it at last? Quoth little Peterkin. Why that I cannot tell, said he, but it was a famous victory. Caspar boasted of the Duke for having won the war for them. Innocent Peterkin asked his grandfather what good comes out of such a misery. Old Caspar is unable to answer the question of the child. All he can say is that it was a famous victory. This remark heightens the sense of irony in the poem as, in spite of such cruelties and casualties, the old man sticks to his illogical belief that the war brought victory to them. Let's revise the poem. Reminding you, read the poem from the textbook. Thank you.